Welcome to the International CPTED Association webinar on all issues related to crime prevention through environmental design. The International CPTED Association, the ICA, is a worldwide nonprofit association for professionals, researchers, urban designers, crime prevention practitioners, and students of CPTED. Our webinar is intended to educate and extend the CPTED message into topics far and wide. The webinar is produced by the ICA, and introductory music was kindly prepared for us by a Denver-based band, Move. My name is Matea Mihnyac, and I'm Executive Director of the ICA. Before we start the webinar today, I would like to invite you to join the ICA if you're not yet a member. You can find information about the benefits of ICA membership on our website. If you follow the link displayed on the website, on the screen. And anyone can join, so you will see the process when you view it on the website. So you're very welcome to join us and let us know if you have any questions about that. So before we start, also just a quick disclaimer that the views expressed in today's presentation belong to our guest speakers and do not necessarily reflect the position of the ICA. Okay, I would like to, before we start, I would just like to introduce our speakers today. And we have our esteemed panelists today. So Dr. Macarena Rao, the president of the ICA. Macarena will also act as a panelist today. And Macarena hails from Latin America. And then we will follow by the presentation by Dr. Paul van Zomeren, who is a regional director for Europe. So welcome, Paul. We also have Dr. Randy Atlas, who is joining the webinar, but unfortunately in a virtual format because he something came up. So, but he prepared a brief recording for us. So we're looking forward to sharing that with you. And then we will continue with Dr. Tim Pascoe, who's a regional director coming from the United Kingdom. So welcome everyone. I will also, I would just like to let you know that you will also be able to ask questions during or after the presentation. So the format today will be brief presentations by each of the speakers, and then we're going to be addressing your questions, some that we have received ahead of time and some that you will also leave in the Q&A box. So feel free please to ask questions, and you can also upvote them if there's questions that are pertinent to you as well. So please don't hesitate to ask. Okay, so I will hand over to Macarena. So Macarena, please take it away, and thank you everyone for joining, and enjoy the webinar. Talk to you later.
Thank you, Matea. Thank you, Matea. And dear ladies and gentlemen, good day and welcome to the ISO CPTED webinar from ICA. My name is Dr. Macarena Rao Vargas, and I am the former ICA president. This year is very relevant for ICA because we are consolidating our umbrella initiative that was approved past year by the ICA board. That initiative seeks to articulate all CPTED practitioners from different regions of the world to increase synergy in CPTED practice. Also, this year, ICA has its 25th anniversary, so it is a very special year. The ISO CPTED standard appears in this context past January, after many years of hard work done by very experienced CPTED practitioners all around the world and ICA directors. From ICA side, it is my pleasure to introduce 3 ICA directors that will present relevant information about the ISO CPTED standard: Dr. Paul van Zomeren, Dr. Randy Atlas, and Dr. Tim Pascoe. Please, Paul, go ahead with your presentation.
Hi, this is Paul van Zomeren speaking from sunny Amsterdam, actually. Standardization. So I'd start with a general introduction on CPTED standardization. This is me, a regional director, researcher consultant with DSP Group, working 25 years on standardization already. Let's start with a simple question. What is a standard? You see a few examples of standards here. European standards, that's CEN, and worldwide standards, that's ISO. We will go into the details of these CEN and ISO standards later on. First, a definition. The European definition of a standard is a technical document designed to be used as a rule, a guideline, or a definition. So it's a guideline. And important is that it is consensus built. It is a repeatable way of doing something. And standards are created by bringing together all interested parties. So this is the European definition. We also have the ISO definition, and I like this one very much. It says standards are distilled wisdom of people with expertise. So, okay. And well, the rest is more or less the same. It unites people such as manufacturers, sellers, buyers, customers, all kinds of experts and people. Well, this brings me to my own simple definition. I think a standard is simply a text made by experts that are here today, and it is a text on which there is consensus. And the text might either be a product or a service or a process. We will mainly talk about process standards today. Note that product standards are normally very precise and rather technical, a dull text. Process standards are often a bit fake and general. And another important thing is a standard is nothing new. It is not very innovative. It is simply the basics. Well, I mentioned it. You have standards for products, for services and processes. Products like, for example, if you look at crime, burglary resistant doors, for bullets, for street lighting. And well, there must be about 1 billion other products there are standards for. You use them a lot in everyday life. There are also standards for services. A good example of that is a standard which is issued by the ICA, the International CPTED Association. It's a standard for the question, who is a CPTED expert? It's called ICCP. There's also one called CAP for CPTED training. These are also standards. We will mainly talk today about standards for processes. And there are a few well-known examples. The first one is, you probably all know it, the one on quality management, ISO 9000. There's also one on risk management. You probably know it too. That is the 31000 series. And since 2003, nearly 20 years, there is already a CPTED standard for Europe. The name is a bit different, and it's called the CEN 14383 series. And since only a few months, 2021, there's also a worldwide CPTED standard, the ISO 22341, and it is issued in 2021. Well, I talked about CEN, about ISO, and you have all these other abbreviations. You have AFNOR, BIS, DIN, etc., etc. Important is that every nation, every country has its own national standardization body. That might be the British Standard Institute in the UK, or DIN in Germany, or CATS in Korea. In the Netherlands, it's called NEN. And these bodies, these institutes, are either private or public. But every country has such an institute. Then there are regional umbrellas. Like, for example, for Europe, there is CEN, Comité Européen de Normalisation, European Standardization Institute. And worldwide, there is the International Standardization Organization, ISO. So, okay, standards, but how do we make these standards? That's actually, it looks quite simple. It is talking, and meeting, and then sharing. We have to remember that in every country there are about, well, at least 1,000 ideas, 1,000 approaches, 1,000 guides, and 1,000 obligations and laws, 1,000 different stakeholders and actors, and several national and professional languages. And in the end, it has to boil down to one simple text. I mentioned that in the beginning. A standard on which there is consensus. A text, only text of, say, 20 pages. It might be in between 10 to 50 pages. CPTED and standardization. Well, we all know that CPTED is a very diverse field of expertise. And the question is always, which principles and processes do we agree on? What terminology and what definition do we use? One of the statements of the ICA is that the ICA promotes globally and supports local organizations. So there is the difference between global and local, and consensus would help a lot if we could have that. So CPTED is, I call it global and local. It is delivered locally by different stakeholders and actors, and they follow local rules, local laws and guidances in different cultures, different stakeholders, different languages. So we definitely cannot make standards for the details. We have to look at the more general principles. We can standardize the general CPTED principles, the CPTED processes, and the CPTED terminology. Maybe on a local level you can do more, but this is what we can do on a worldwide or a regional level. Okay, what are the main principles we all agree on in CPTED? And these principles are, for example, in the ISO standard nowadays. Well, there are three. CPTED implies two different concepts. It is a physical and a social approach. So often that's called first generation, second generation. CPTED should consider physical CPTED strategies as well as social CPTED strategies. That's the first principle, which is in all these standards. The other one, the second one, it should always include all stakeholders, all actors. So it's all about participation and partnership. That's another principle. And the third principle is CPTED always focuses on a specific type of environment. That might be a residential area, a city center, transport hub, schools, or whatever. So these are three important principles. And then there are all kinds of details. Well, we know a lot of these details. We know the list under design, for example. It's often called first generation, visibility, access control, territoriality, etc. There's also the second generation, site and social management, the maintenance, and the whole process bit. Coming to that process bit, that's another thing we all agree on, which is in these European and worldwide standards. CPTED always follows a kind of a plan, do, check, act approach. We might have different names for it. First, there's an analysis. Then we plan something together. We analyze and plan together with all stakeholders. Then we do something, and then we evaluate or we audit, we learn from it. It is evidence-based. That is a general CPTED process, which is now standardized. If we dive into the history of CPTED standardization, I already mentioned it started somewhere by the end of the 90s in Europe. It was Denmark, UK, the Netherlands, and the results, and you see it took us about 8 years. We ended up with a standard which was often called the only crime prevention standard in Europe since the Roman Empire. So, well, that was a nice start to begin with. There is a standard. You see the number here. You can buy it with CEN, but also later on an explanation was made called the Safe Polis Manual. It is issued in English, Spanish, French, and Italian. You see the link here. You can download it for free, by the way. After this first set of standards, one on terminology and the umbrella standard on process, there was a whole series of standards from CEN issued between 2003 and 2010. For example, on dwellings, on shops and offices. Tim Pesco did a lot of work in this respect. They are still working on safety in schools, public transport, etc. So it's important to see that it's often not one standard. You have to make, you can make a set of standards, which is very, very useful. And we can think about it on an ISO level too. It is a bit of a European hobby, you might say, building cathedrals. This picture is from Barcelona, especially from our friends from Barcelona. European standardization is still, at this moment, work in progress. We are building new standards, but it's like building cathedrals. We build new standards and we have to renovate and update the earlier standards. That's one thing we are now busy with, for example, updating the old ones. I mentioned the 2003-2007 standards in Europe. At the moment, Tim Pesco and me, but also 15 countries, at least 15 countries, and the ICA Standardization Committee is working on an update on these early standards. And that's a good thing about standards. The updating is obligatory. It is always done after a thorough evaluation. Here you have the link to the evaluation of the European standards. Well, if we turn to the CPTED standard worldwide, the ISO 1, which was issued a few months ago, it was very recently published, and it was a marvelous work, mainly from Harry Park from Korea and from the Swedish Standardization Institute. But of course, as I mentioned it, consensus, many more people contributed to this standard. There is now a worldwide standard on CPTED. And you can find more information about it on the ICA website. This new worldwide standard acknowledges and recognizes CPTED as a social and a physical approach following the principles and processes I mentioned. These processes and principles are in this standard based on the early European ideas. Okay, what is good about a standard? Well, to begin with, the idea of consensus. It is difficult to find consensus, but if you find it, it is worthwhile. So that's very good. Obligatory updates after a thorough evaluation, also a very good thing of standardization. The availability of standards. So you can buy it with every national standardization body, often in translation of the local language. Another good thing, it is part of a broader and well-organized community. I mentioned that you have ISO, you have regionals like CEN, and you have the national standardization body. It is also not very spectacular nor innovative. It is the basics only. It is consensus. And you might think, okay, this is good. And this is, well, this is not too good. One thing is that promotion and marketing is never done by standardization bodies. You have to do it yourself. And ICA is now doing that, for example, with these webinars. Downside to all these standards is the price. It is an expensive text. You have to buy it if you want to download it, and there is a heavy copyright on it. Well, but all in all, I would say go for it. Work on more worldwide standards for CPTED and work on constant updates. A standard is solidified CPTED wisdom and expertise, as we would call it. Well, then a question that was often asked by a lot of people: can I be certified now as an ISO 22341 expert or an ISO CPTED firm, like you do in the ISO 9000 quality management series? Well, the shortest answer is no. And a longer answer is, why should you? The ICA has these perfect certification schemes for expert, ICCP, you can find it on the website, or for education and training, the CAP. But what you can do on a project level in one neighborhood or for one set of buildings or a new building plan, you can state that in this project, in this plan, in this area, we work in compliance with the ISO 22341 standard. And then everyone knows what standard you are following. So I always say you can use that ISO standard as well as the European stuff um, in a simple way by convincing authorities, mainly local authorities, and these authorities have to say something like, well, I don't know how, but I want a safe and secure environment. I want a safe and secure neighborhood or a safe and secure building. Hence, you have to follow the CPTED approach. And then a lot of people will ask, CPTED, what is CPTED? And then the authorities can simply say, well, bloody fools, read and comply with the ISO standard. That's all there is to it. And then the other people, the contractors, the builders, the planners, the designers, the police, whatever, they can simply buy the ISO standard and follow that standard. Well, the ICA has a standardization committee. Here you see the names of the people who are in it. If you have any remarks or questions, please don't hesitate to mail me. And that brings me to a conclusion and to an end. And thank you for your attention. And well, this presentation has no copyright and it is completely free of charge, by the way. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, for your brilliant and great presentation. It is a very complete presentation, so thank you for that. And now we will go to Randy's Atlas video about ISO CPTED.
team was able to provide valuable input and contribution. Hello, this is Randy Atlas. I am the USA representative for the International CPTED Association and the moderator and first speaker for this session that is addressing the new ISO CPTED 2021 guidelines that has been recently approved. I'm honored and privileged to share that the efforts of our International CPTED Association team of volunteers recently achieved a major milestone with the release of the new ISO, International Organization for Standardization standard for CPTED practitioners and security professionals. In coordination with other ISO member countries, our representation and our ICA team was able to provide valuable input and contributions to the standard through ICA's role as the leading organization for the implementation and training and theory development of crime prevention through environmental design. The new ISO 22341 guideline is titled Guidelines for Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design and is now published by the ISO website. Thank you to all the professionals who assisted, and now I'm going to discuss some of the overall findings of it. The launch of the ISO CPTED 2021 guideline awards legitimacy to the subject of crime prevention through environmental design to those countries using ISO for their standards, and it serves as their standard of care or guidelines or code references. This new standard, of course, is an advanced protective measure for that security professionals, architects, engineers, city planners, and public safety professionals have realized that the application of CPTED concepts in their professional practice brings enhanced capabilities to the safety and security of the physical environments that they support. The application of these concepts that have been developed over the past decades allow for the built environment, building designs, and physical factors to positively influence human behavior and to deter crime by those that enter the planned environment. ISO 22341 Guidelines for Crime Prevention through Environmental Design reviews the basics of CPTED through its historical background, 4 key considerations of CPTED, as well as CPTED strategies. Those strategies provide fundamental guidance for their application within the planning stage, design stage, as well as the site and social management stages of the design and construction process. The standard also reviews a 5-step process for the implementation of CPTED, which supports oversight and aligns to ISO standards for risk management. The standard was initiated within ISO by protective security professionals from the ISO member country, South Korea, and grew to include respected protected security professionals from multiple member countries to contribute not only to the standard's content, but also to the global application of CPTED concepts. And as a result of the launch of this ISO standard, it awards legitimacy to the subject of CPTEDs and allows those countries using the ISO for standards of care to now have a crime prevention reference document. The guidelines adds to the field of the American National Safety Institute and American Society of Industrial Security Physical Security Standard of 2020 and the National Fire Protection Association 730 Premises Security Guidelines of 2020, which also contains CPTED references and chapters. Hopefully the ISO guideline will bring forth further codification steps of CPTED into building codes, local ordinances, and regulations. The goal here is to have codification of CPTED so that it becomes uniformly applied by design professionals. Some of the highlights of the new ISO guideline include a table of contents is organized to address the environmental context of crime, the basics of CPTED, the process of implementation, and several annexes. The document is 54 pages long, and there's a table that provides CPTED examples by the stages of planning, design, and management. The document reinforces the need to conduct a thorough crime risk assessment for new or proposed environments. The goal here is to determine your functional design requirements of security and CPTED in the early stages so that it can be effortlessly and affordably included and implemented throughout the process of design and construction. Finally, the document does address the physical and social aspects of CPTED, and including first, second, and third generation methodologies. At this point, I'm going to have the other speakers introduce their sections, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you. Now we'll present Dr. Tim Pascoe's presentation. Go ahead, Tim.
Tim, do we have you there?
Okay, I hope I'm with you now.
You are.
Good afternoon, good morning, or if good evening, wherever you might be. It's a real privilege to be talking to such an international audience. My name's Dr. Tim Pascoe. I'm an ICA director. And like Paul, I've been involved with the SEN European standards for too many years. And I've been involved in CPTED as a community safety practitioner, as a criminologist, as a crime prevention worker for 25 years plus as more, so I'm nearly as old as Paul in that area. What I hope to do today is follow on from what Paul did, telling us where the standards come from, all the process, and Randy about the pros and cons. And I'm going to give you a practical example of how ISO can be applied, and also how it reflects, we'd like to think was best practice on how we applied CPTED on this particular example. Before that, just to illustrate why and how it's going to cross-reference, the ISO standard makes it very clear what those strategies are, and they are planning strategies, design strategies, and social management strategies. And as Paul illustrated, the first two relate to first generation CPTED, and the social management relates to second generation CPTED. So we got first and second generation CPTED actually applied within the strategies for the ISO. The ISO is really about, this ISO standard is about process, and that process is clearly identified in the document, and this is what it suggests, that there's an oversight, there's a communication, consultation, scope, risk, then risk treatment or mitigation, which is when you apply your CPTED solutions, then a monitoring stage. What we're going to make, by an example, show how that has all been put together and applied in a real life situation, how we actually done it in practice. So this is a UK example, and it's a major regeneration project in the centre of London. It's creating over 10,000 new homes, employment space, retail space, social facilities, community facilities, and green spaces. So in effect, we're creating a brand new neighbourhood in the middle of a city, and we've applied the ISO CPTED principles to it. If just for your context, this is the Greenwich Peninsula. Hopefully you can see my arrow on there. This is the River Thames that goes right to the City of London. This is the area we're talking about. For those who are aware of London, we have the O2, very famous concert at the performance site at the top of the peninsula. We've got an existing neighbourhood here, and this space here, it currently is vacant. In the last century, we had housing there. In the 1960s, it was classified as slum housing. It was knocked down. Since then, it was derelict. Now we're trying to regenerate this neighbourhood. So this is existing O2 venue at the moment. This is the derelict land here. This is the new neighbourhood we hope to build. So what is the process? What was the process here? The first was it reflected, the wording might be different in some cases, but it reflected entirely that ISO process, which was communication, consultation. It was identifying risk, then mitigating that risk and monitoring it. It's about those planning, design, and social issues that Paul was talking about. So kind of the planning is what we want to achieve, the design, how we're going to do it. Social management is about involving the community in that process. So our first stage was looking at planning, it was audit, then we did a design stage, and then we did a social stage, engaging everybody, and it was overseen by the planners, developers, and stakeholders, so there was some oversight there. So the baseline audit, it's all about communication, it's about consultation, it's about planning. So it's working in context. Context is one of the CPTED's most used words, favorite words, and it is there for a purpose because the context will be different at every time. So we have an ISO process, but when we actually apply it, the context will be very different in every city, in every country. So you have to understand the policy context. What are the local rules, local ordinances? What's the local geography of the area? This is a brownfield site. It's going in alongside existing neighborhoods. It's not just been dropped in. So we have to understand how it integrates with existing communities. So we have to understand the context. Then we have to get an idea of all the data. What are the problems? What are the issues there? We have to do the communication. So we interview with key stakeholders. That might be community representatives. It might be the local police. It might be environmental, be the local authorities or councillors. We need to collect data, and that might be crime data. It might be environmental data. It might be walking the site and collecting our own physical data. We need to review existing documentation that exists already for the plans. All of that we put into that big data pot, start to analyze, and we then understand the context. And we're beginning to do our risk assessment. So we're doing our planning stage. And just again, for a bit of context, this is where we were again. This is the area that we were going to we are building, putting in a new neighborhood. This is the O2. It's got its own bus station up here. It's got its own train station. So people are already traveling up and down here, going through our new neighborhood when it's built. And we can already see there is a significant crime issue. So we know we've got some risks we need to mitigate in our new construction. And these are just reinforcing that this is what the data and the context told us about the local areas that we're trying to build in. So we already know that it's surrounded by other socially deprived neighborhoods. We already know that it's a permeable area and there's going to be movement generators going up to those bus stations through our new housing. So we got a very good idea what potential problems we have. We got a very good feel for the context. Now we have to look at the actual design of the space and what we're going to put in and how we're going to mitigate that risk and what problems we're going to look at that. Again, we do that by a process, and that process is the way we do it is to break the structure and the planning in the area down. Then using our knowledge of the risk there, we apply our CPTED solutions and ideas. So we look at the access in that area and look at those factors each in turn. We think about the lighting for access and movement, escape routes, permeability, for example. So we're not creating a space there where residents or visitors will get disoriented, will get lost. We don't want to create an area where there are so many escape routes and pathways that a local offender will have an easy way to escape and local people would get lost. We don't want it too permeable, but we don't want to create isolation either. So this is where we start using our CPTED solutions. Again, we do that with the structure of the place. So we want to maximize natural surveillance. We want to create active frontages, those ideas from Jane Jacobs, eyes on the street. We want to create natural gathering places, but we want those to be in the right place. So we don't, for example, potentially want to build our skate park and our youth facilities right outside the flats we're building for the elderly. So we've got to put things in the appropriate spaces. Again, all about structure. Then our next one is about surveillance, and we love natural surveillance, another key CPTED principle. And again, we need to maximize that. We want kind of open, bright spaces, high visibility, so we can actually see our residents can see, our visitors can see what's happening. We're going to have significant CCTV here. So for CCTV to work, you've got to have clear building lines, clear lines of sight. All of that has to be thought about and built in at this kind of stage. And appropriate landscaping and cover, so it doesn't grow out of control, it doesn't provide cover for offenders. Ownership, again, another important part of CPTED. We want people to be proud of their neighbourhood, to get a feel of territoriality. Again, we can do that all, again, using CPTED tools, using things like street art, gateway effects coming into the neighbourhood. All of these we take into account when we're doing this to mitigate risk. Physical protection. This is the kind of thing you might actually get at the building envelope, which is kind of target hardening, which is our traditional locks and bolts. And this is where we can switch from the process standards to actually product standards, where we will have standards for locks, for windows, for doors that meet CEN or even your national, for example, the UK BSI performance standards. So again, this is the world of standards for products. When we get to the building envelope, again, it's very relevant to the CPTED world. Activities, again, we need to balance it. We don't want to create those conflict situations. All of that is the planning design and comes under the first part of it, we might suggest, which is physical CPTED. We also need the social CPTED or CPTED-M, which is comprehensive environmental design and management of that space, which says we don't just build it and walk away, we help and manage that space after it's built. We have that social element, that social management, and we've built this in as well. So again, we're meeting the ISO social CPTED element of the process. Here, in this particular project, we were looking at swift, effective maintenance, looking at people presence and community consultation. So for you, I'm sure you're all aware of another one of the theories that underpins a lot of CPTED work, that broken window syndrome, the idea of one window gets broken, if you don't repair it quickly, you get another window broken, you get that spiral of decline. So, and then the neighbourhood deteriorates, you get higher crime. Again, we've built in with the management of the space, any criminal damage gets repaired immediately. This is a long-term project. It'll take 5 to 10 years to construct it all. Some areas of the peninsula is going to be a building site for quite a few years. So it's going to be at risk of fly tipping, which is illegal dumping of rubbish, abandoned cars. All of those we have to get a grasp on, and that's what we're talking about by a swift and effective maintenance. The area is also going to be supervised by caretaking and maintenance staff, all from one company, which will be actual real people, uniform people, which is another great CPTED idea and CPTED principle of capable guardianship. So again, that's going to be built in. Again, social management, but with a CPTED flavour. And the community that is going to exist there. They will have community structures, residents associations, for example, events, and we'll have formal processes to actually audit, ask their views and opinions about their own neighbourhood, so they have a direct say in how that works. So again, that community consultation is in place. So again, delivering social CPTED as the ISO identifies. Surveillance again is built in, and that maximises formal surveillance. There may well be security guards, police patrolling it. Informal, we've got our capable guardianship, we built in CCTV. Surveillance, again, a classic part of CPTED. And the last part of the CPTED circle that Paul was saying is to analyze, plan, act, evaluate, is to monitor and respond and evaluate. So we've got to remember when we go in and we're dealing with the architect, the planners, the developers, it's a negotiation, you're a member of that team, you have to ensure that your suggestions are taken on board. It is a long-term project, you have to monitor the process. Often 2 or 3 years into the project, you'll see budget cuts. You need to ensure that yours isn't one of those going to be cut. It's often the social elements are often seen as easy targets. So you have to be part of that management team, checking that your solutions are being implemented. And equally as important, you have to evaluate as you go along to ensure that you're measuring to see if crime's gone down, if antisocial behaviour has gone down, if the quality of life is improving, to ensure that, one, that your suggestions are accepted, you're proving they've worked, and then you have that evidence base for when you go to the next project, or you want to share those experiences with your other CPTED practitioners. You've got sound evidence that this has really worked. So that's the brief example of hopefully showing where ISO has come from. It's come from the CPTED word of real examples. It shows how ISO can be, the ISO processes can actually be implemented. Back to what does the ISO standard actually tell you? Well, it tells you about terminology, it tells you what CPTED it is, it tells you what the strategies and approaches are. But what it doesn't do, it doesn't give you the context. It doesn't give you the practical examples of how to apply CPTED. It doesn't give you the how to do it in detail. It doesn't tell you what the next stages of CPTED might be. For example, we got 3rd generation CPTED growing at the moment, and it doesn't give you the shared experience of all your other CPTED practitioners. It's a very good start, but the gaps need filling, and the gaps are filled by the ICA, our organisation. That's why we're here, and that's why we're hopefully promoting this standard and building on it. So thank you, and I shall hand the microphone back to Macarena.
Thank you so much, Tim, and thank you so much. I want to thank especially to Paul, Randy, and Tim. Your presentations were incredible and very clear. We have so many questions from the audience, and also we have some interesting feedback from the polling question. I will start with a question from the question and answer done by Francesc Guillén, that is regarding your case study, Tim. Francesc says, I would like to know how the partnership public-private is working in the Greenwich Peninsula. Who is the leader? Where the money comes from? Who is the actor guaranteeing CPTED standards? Please, Tim, can you answer that?
I can tell you that we were brought in by the planner and developer. They were, to get the planning permission, the council demanded that they implement CPTED standards. So we were brought in begrudgingly perhaps, but once the planner and developer was on board, they were fully committed to the project. I can come back and tell you the exact clients' names, but they asked to be discreet when we used their example.
Thank you, Tim. And we have an interesting feedback from the audience to the polling question. Have you had a chance to access and read the CPTED ISO standard yet? If not, why not? Yes, only 18%, not too expensive, 20%, no, not relevant to my line of work, 3%, and no, haven't got it yet, 59%. What do you think about that, Paul? How can we help on that process?
Yeah, well, the standard is pretty new. It is only issued a few months ago, and the publicity around the standard now starts. So let's hope that more people will use it, and also use it in a way as shown by Tim and me, simply telling, for example, local authorities that such a standard exists and that it would be good to follow this type of standard. Then you have the same type of terminology, you have the same type of process as marvelously shown by Tim. So it will take a while, but well, implementing standards, making standards is a slow process. Implementing standards is certainly also a slow process, but in the end, it always works. Is my opinion.
Great answer. And you, Tim, do you want to agree something to that?
Yeah, I think also, I think the contracting authorities will look to and expect planners and developers to use these standards in the future. So it's almost it'll, in some areas, it'll become like an ordinance or a part of the planning approach that you will have to show that you have adhered to that standard to get the planning permission.
Thanks for the answer, Tim and Paul. Here we have another very good questions from Terence Lowe. Hi, Terence, how are you? How do you envisage new CPTED findings and theories will be integrated into the ISO standard? Please give us our answers.
Yeah, that's something I mentioned quite a lot. One of the good things about standards is that there is a kind of process which is obligatory to update these standards. Again, this process is not on a day-to-day basis. It is a slow process, but you see that we are now updating the standards which we made about 10 years ago in Europe, and we put all the new ideas and the new approaches in the new update. So again, this process is a slow process, but in the end, it is consensus also about new issues, and that's important too. So it works in this way.
Yeah, as Paul said, it is a slow process, but as he did identified in his definition, it's distilled knowledge. So it takes on board the new approaches, but ensures there's consensus on how it's applied. So the final product is agreed by everybody.
Very interesting. Thank you for the answers. Here's another question in our question and answer box. Catherine Curry, if we practice CPTED, are we bound by the ISO standard?
I think that's an interesting one. If you are never bound by standards, since a standard is not obligatory. It can become obligatory when, and you're bound to it, when the politicians, local authorities, for example, say, okay, you have to comply to this standard. It is also possible that in a group of people together, you say, okay, we like this standard, let's follow it. And then as a group, you have bound yourself to the standard, you might say. So in a way, this is flexible. A standard is never obligatory, certainly in the beginning not. It can become obligatory if you want to do it yourself as a group of people, or if it is somewhere in the law, which might be a local guidance or ordinance or law or a national one, or even in Europe it might be European, for example.
Yes, you're not bound to it. You may be complied to use it if it was made a rule or law, or you may want to use it as practice to say make yourself stand out from the others because you are applying what is considered internationally best practice.
Very interesting also. As we know, fear perception is a big issue in our cities all around the world. And here is a question regarding fear perception. How is fear of crime addressed by ISO CPTED?
It is in the European standard, and there's a whole separate annex for it. And in the ISO worldwide standard, it is also included. So the standard is talking about crime, antisocial behavior, and fear of crime, which is, by the way, sometimes also referred to as feelings of insecurity, feelings of unsafety. But it is an issue in this standard too. And I remember that Tim also showed some examples of it.
It's also covered as part of the standard analysis when you would do a CPTED practice. So it's fear of crime is included, as well as crime as antisocial behavior. All of these are assessed by the CPTED expert.
Here we have another question, very interesting, coming from the African region. Here we have, from Simon Oyesikun. Good to be here. Is this ISO standard global? Do they fit into every region, Africa in particular?
The answer is yes, because it's a process, not and it's applying that process in your own African context. So I would say the simple answer is yes.
If you want it to be, it is indeed, yes.
Perfect. Also, here we have another from Fernando Zavala. Are there any free resources to consult the new ISO standard?
Well, there is the ICA, of course. There might be regional chapters in your region, or national chapters. And an important issue is that the ICA, I mentioned that briefly, has a program called ICCP. So you have registered CPTED expert, you might say. And for certain, if you go to these people, you know that they know all the ins and outs of that standard. So you have that on a worldwide basis, the ICA. For example, in the Netherlands, we have our own program, and you have what they call registered CPTED experts, and they know all about all these type of standards.
And we can build on that. If you don't have the knowledge as well, the ICA has got its own, or is developing its own training programs within CPTED as well.
Oh, thank you, Paul and Tim, to highlight these ICA's program that are so relevant in a global scale. Here we have another from Daniel Brooks. Are there many or any auditing bodies measuring against the standard at this time?
That's if it's done, it is done as Tim showed, and he called it quality control. So in the end, people are looking if the standards is met, but you have to look at this issue at a project level. So it is the standards are on a national basis and on European, regional, or worldwide basis, but the quality control has to be done locally, and the standards, the ISO standard actually says that has to be done. Tim showed that perfectly in the London example, I guess.
So there is no formal audit process linked to the standard. It's but the process in the standard suggests you should do that monitoring and evaluation, and that would be done at a local level.
Thank you for the great answers. Here we have another question from the Philippines. So hello to the Philippines. Where can we get or is ISO certification in the field of security and safety as well as criminology is available? It's from Johnny Villarin.
Well, the standard is available from ISO and your national standardization bodies. We just explained how it works with CPTED experts, and that's another issue. So you can go to these people.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want broader knowledge about CPTED and you can't get it locally, you can go to the ICA website. And if you remember there's a huge amount of resources there as well.
Great, great. Here we have another very interesting question from Tom Bindels. Hi, are there big differences between the European CEN standard and the ISO CPTED standard? And if it yes, what are those in general?
Yeah, so what actually was done was that the CEN basis, the standard made by CEN was also used for the ISO, but there are definitely some changes. Just to give you an example, in the ISO standard, they talk about I think it's an oversight body. So, and in the European standard, we use the terminology of a responsible body. So local authorities who are responsible for what's happening. So there are differences. And the interesting thing, and then that refers to what I called one community, one family. This whole standardization bureaucracy is somehow connected. So we are now updating the European standard. And of course, we are now looking at ISO again. And well, we use that knowledge on a European level. So it is it started by going from Europe to worldwide, from CEN to ISO, and now it is up to us in Europe again to update the old standard and to use the ISO information, and also the new ideas about CPTED, of course. So there is a connection. It is they often, I think they use the terminology of it's one family. It is the national bodies, the regional bodies like CEN, and the worldwide bodies like ISO. It is one family, and they are connected. It is difficult processes, very bureaucratic, etc. But it works fine as far as I can see it. Slow but fine.
The other main difference, Paul, I think, is also that the European standard focuses on to different contexts, like dwellings, like schools, like other things, transport, whereas the ISO is international and it's probably not appropriate because the context be far too different. But within Europe, we could generalize for those areas. So the CEN standard does cover particular types of contexts, like the schools, like dwellings, like shopping centers, like petrol stations, and gives more specific kind of advice.
Yeah, you're
Here,
completely right.
sorry.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, here Cornelis Wittenbogart is asking another interesting question for you too. Can the ISO standard or other standard be written into, example, local documents like detailed plans? If so, how? Can you explain that?
Yeah, you can simply say something like, okay, in this case, in this country, or in this project, or in this local environment, you have to comply to this ISO standard. So the good thing about all these standards is it is just a simple number, and you can simply say, well, you have to comply with ISO 22341 version 2021. So or you can even say, well, you have to comply with a certain chapter of that standard. So in this way, it is rather flexible, and you can refer to these standards and use it.
That you ask them to comply and evidence how they're going to do that part of the standard.
Here, Guadalupe Aguirre is doing also a very interesting and trending trending topic question. Is the gender perspective included in the CPTED approach? And if it is so, how?
It is included in several ways, I would say. This is an interesting one. It is for example, included in the difference between violence and sexual violence. It is also very important for the issue we touched earlier on, fear of crime. So in recent European research done by the European Union, it was shown that a lot of people, mainly women, have a kind of avoidance behavior for certain spaces, for certain places. You don't want to go there. And this is something which I think is really, really serious, and you should somehow address it. And in that respect, the issue of what is simply called fear of crime, feelings of insecurity, is in these standards, and it is important to focus on that one too.
I'd be quite interested to hear some of our other panelists, like I think Manjari could perhaps have a particular view on this from India, if she's available to join us.
Yes, Tim, I'm right here. I am sorry, if you could just give me a context to the question and the discussion.
The question was looking at how is gender being taken into account in ISO or within CPTED?
Yes, actually, this is something which is very close to my heart and very, very relevant in India, about how simple CPTED principles, like how CPTED works on the streets, and simple character of the streets, the sidewalks, the secondary functions, the kind of populatedness, the people around. These kind of things tend to impact women's security in specific, especially in the Indian context, because, you know, when you have a woman being molested or being troubled on a roadside, and if there are people there and the people take action, or even just by virtue of people being there, the fear that they would be reprimanded for this kind of a thing is something which is very, very strongly linked to CPTED and very, very strongly linked to gender security across the world. I think the perceptions, the principles remain global across the world. So definitely, and in fact, just to add to the discussion which is happening here, I would also like to add here that just like ISO, CPTED is also finding its way into other regional standards, pretty much like the CEN in Europe. It is getting added to the BIS, Bureau of Indian Standards, in India. We've made some great headway, and it is getting recognized as a very important strategy for us to tackle, or rather, should I say, supplement everything that is happening at the social front, whatever is happening socially to, you know, uplift the gender disparity. CPTED is going to add force to that struggle for us here in this part of the world. And I thank you for the question, Tim. I hope I have added light to whatever you wanted me to say. If you have something specific, I would be happy to elaborate on that further.
Thank you, Manjari. Thank you, Manjari. Very good, your explanation, and also adds to the discussion the flavor of your region. That is part of the umbrella initiative idea. The idea is that the audience realize that we are connected as ICA in different regions of the world with much expertise. Here we have another very interesting question from Douglas Olson. Who decides if you are in compliance with the ISO?
In the end, that will be decided locally on a project level or a local, or well, sometimes even maybe a national level. In the standard, the ISO standard, this is in the process called the oversight body. In the European standard, I remember we use the terminology of a responsible body. So in the end, it will be an institute or a body which starts the whole process, and by the end also works on the quality control. Are the objectives indeed met? So this is a type of approach which resembles a bit the ISO 9000 approach of quality management. So it starts by, well, you have to a specific body, and I would say a democratic legitimized body sets the standards, says you have to use this standard. They set the objective, the goals, and then they follow the process, and in the end they decide, okay, all the objectives we have set at the start are now met, so this is okay. So this is how it works, which makes it, by the way, very flexible. There's not a worldwide director. You decide it in your own local environment.
Tim?
Paul's answered that perfectly. In the goodness of time, if it is adopted by more formal planning authorities, by regulators and rules, then those people would then ensure that you met that at the moment. But at the moment, we should be doing our own evaluation and ensuring that what we put in is actually working. So it's a self-regulatory part, certainly at the present time.
Thank you for the great answers. The feedback of the audience is increasing and growing, and it's very positive. Here we have another question from Francesc. Thank you, Francesc, for your active participation. Do you think that the crisis we are in due to the pandemic may influence the process of standardization in CPTED? It is bound to slow down the process?
I think it's certainly going to impact on the CPTED world and how we look at how we apply CPTED. And we've already seen that. We've had a number of webinars on CPTED and the pandemic and how certain countries we are rearranging movement in the streets, and how the use of green spaces, for example, in the UK is growing, and how that can be managed. I think it's inevitable then it's going to slow the ISO process. But the ISO is a process at the moment rather than a product standard, so it should be able to encompass the issues raised by CPTED, by COVID.
Yeah, just to add to that, I remember that in the beginning of the pandemic, we had a few workshops worldwide showing the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic related to the CPTED issue. I'm sure that the issue of pandemic in future issues of the standard will be included also. So, but this is also very much a context type of a thing, which differs locally, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Here we have also some questions left. One very interesting and very practical is, how will practitioners show they are using or implementing the standards?
I think is that for us was that I think if I was implementing it as a consultancy, I would use it in my marketing material to ensure that anybody who's aware that I am ISO concurrent. For example, in the United Kingdom, for many years, there's been a CPTED-related police scheme called Secured by Design, and the police use that as a marketing scheme to show homes that are secured that way are safer. And I would imagine you'd use the ISO presumably in a marketing exercise like that.
Yeah, I would use it in the same way, and I think a lot of politicians and local authorities can also use it in that way by saying, okay, there is now a worldwide consensus on CPTED. Let's look at that and let's use that. And something you can notice there was also in the answer of Manjara from India, that you see that these standards influence also national approaches and local approaches. So it is also a kind of an ISO standard simply implies there is a kind of a worldwide consensus about something like CPTED and the issues it should cover. So that's important too.
Elsie Montalegre add a comment in our box. She says, this is another excellent webinar run by ICA. So congratulations for our guest speakers. And the final question before we go to your highlight ideas. How important is ISO in any organization? It's a simple question.
Sorry, I didn't get it.
How important is ISO CPTED in any organization, or could be?
I think it's if you're using it, it's very important because you're reflecting the international agreements and reflecting the distilled knowledge and expertise of all your comrades who apply it. So it's very important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say the same. So you can use it in a very general way, and well, maybe the shortest way to put it is CPTED has arrived now. So we agree on a worldwide basis that CPTED is something which we all can and must use, and that's important to tell the world and to tell also the local people you're working with.
Thank you, Paul and Tim, for your great answers. And now we have some 15 minutes left. I want to give you the microphone so you can do some closing remarks. Please, do you want to highlight some ideas for the audience, Paul, and then Tim?
Tim?
I would like to highlight what supports the ISO is that distilled knowledge of experts, and that's also what the ICA is about. And just to reinforce my last couple of slides, that what the ICA doesn't, the ISO doesn't do, it's what the ICA does. It explores with examples, it shares knowledge, it tells you how to do the process. The ISO tells you the process, the ICA can help you deliver that process, can provide you examples, it can give you that national or local context, it can share ideas. So the ICA is here to fill those gaps and to expand the next part of the CPTED world for third generation CPTED, for example.
Yeah, you can compare it like the standard, the ISO standard, or European standards, or any other standards on CPTED are a kind of a general skeleton you might use, but the real flesh has to be put on by people. So it is also always a human affair. And like Tim said, the context is extremely important. And that differs from context to context. And you need experts, you need the local residents or the future residents. You need people who know everything about this environment to put some flesh on the skeleton, so to speak.
Thank you so much, Paul, Randy, and Tim, because of your incredible presentation. You make so clear what is the main meaning of ISO CPTED standard. The audience is very happy. We had a super positive feedback. Thank you to the audience for so many regions of the world for your incredible and brilliant questions. The questions helps us to have this discussion. And please stay tuned for next webinars and ICA activities. And also please stay tuned with all news regarding our ICA conference in Sweden at the end of the year. This will be an incredible event and we want to be connected with you as much as possible. So I will pass the microphone to Mateja Mejillac, who is our Executive ICA Director. Back to you, Mateja.
Thank you very much, Macarena, and thank you so much to all the panelists and to the audience today. I hope that you gain some more clarity when it comes to the ISO standard. Obviously, there's still a lot more to unpack, I think, when it comes to the standard. And I'm really happy that we also, that our panelists actually emphasize the importance of also practitioners who are well experienced, who actually have the knowledge to implement it, because it's not enough to just have a standard or any policy. You also need to make sure that you implement it context specific, as it was emphasized, as well as in an evidence-based way, which also was one of the questions, as well as in an experiential way, in a way that actually we know might benefit and also pay attention to the public and users of space. So thank you so much for emphasizing that. So before closing, I would just like to avoid more issues with technology. I would just invite everyone again to join us. If you're not yet a member, again, anyone can join. You just submit an application online. There's a membership fee, annual fee as well. If you have any questions regarding membership, do let us know. But if you join us, you also have benefits, which you can also review on the website. If you're interested in our individual certification program, please check also on our website. There is more information there, and email us if you have additional questions. So this is intended for CPTED practitioners and who also have some experience already in practicing CPTED. And this is also the program that is then linked to course accreditation program, which is intended for CPTED course developers and instructors who would like to have their course recognized. And individuals who complete an accredited course are then fast-tracked through CPTED certification as well, as long as they satisfy all the requirements. Also follow us on social media. We're on most of the platforms. And lastly, like Macarena has already said, we're very excited about the upcoming conference that is planned for November. This is also our 25th anniversary of existence of the ICA. So this should be a very exciting event. Let's hope everything goes as planned COVID-wise, and we really hope to see as many as of you as possible over there in Sweden, together with our partners who are in Sweden on the ground. So thank you very much. I will close with a short promo video, and we hope to see you next time. Stay safe. Thank you everyone again, and we shall see you next time. Bye-bye.